I never thought I'd find myself alone in the old lake house with my father-in-law. Not like that, not for so long. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway for my husband Daniel and me. We'd been arguing more than usual lately, about money, schedules, his long hours, and how I felt like I was slowly becoming invisible in his life. So he suggested we get out of town, clear our minds, and reconnect at his family's lake house, a quiet place tucked into the trees beside Crystal Lake. But just before we left, Daniel was called away on an emergency at work. He apologized, promised he'd join me the next day, and insisted I still go. To my surprise, his father, Robert, was already at the lake house when I arrived. He'd driven up the day before for some maintenance work and didn't expect company. I considered turning back, but he welcomed me kindly. "Stay," he said. "I'll keep out of your way." Robert was nothing like I expected. He had a strong presence, tall, graying at the temples, sharp blue eyes, and a quiet calmness that made the house feel less lonely. I'd always seen him as a reserved, distant figure during holidays and family dinners. But that weekend, I saw a different side. The first night, the rain started. Not a soft drizzle but a heavy downpour that echoed on the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. The power went out before dinner. No signal, no electricity, just the sound of the storm and the warm light of candles we scattered around the cabin. I laughed at how cliché it all felt. "Like a movie," I joked. Robert smiled. "One of those suspense movies where everyone's trapped in the woods." We ended up in the living room, sharing stories by the fireplace. I told him about my job, my dreams of starting a business, how frustrated I felt lately, how I didn't know if Daniel even saw me anymore. It poured out of me, unexpectedly. He listened, not passively, but intently, like my words mattered. "I had no idea you were carrying all that," he said quietly when I finished. "I didn't either, until now." We sat in silence for a long time. Something shifted in the room. Not something inappropriate, not something romantic, but real. A bridge formed between us. One that hadn't been there before. The next morning, the storm had flooded part of the road leading into town. Robert and I were stuck for at least another day. He made coffee over the gas stove and handed me a steaming mug like we'd been doing this routine for years. I couldn't explain the comfort I felt in his presence. The day passed slowly. We played old board games, cooked together, even fixed a broken shelf in the storage room. We talked more about his late wife, about how he missed her, about how grief doesn't get smaller, but life eventually grows bigger around it. He told me how much he admired my resilience, and I told him how I sometimes felt like I was failing as a wife, as a woman who had once dreamed big and now just tried to survive the daily grind. "You're not failing," he said, looking at me with quiet conviction. "You're evolving. That's harder than anyone admits." That evening, the air inside the cabin felt different. Heavy, warm, intimate. As we cleaned up after dinner, I accidentally dropped a wine glass. It shattered, and I froze. But Robert stepped in without hesitation, gently pulling my hand away from the shards. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded. But something about the way he held my wrist lingered. Not in a romantic way, but as if someone had finally seen me, not just looked at me. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked quietly to the living room, where I found him sitting by the fire again, reading a worn book. He looked up and smiled softly. "Couldn't sleep either?" I shook my head and joined him. We didn't talk much this time. Just sat in silence, fire crackling between us, the distance on the couch slowly closing. I rested my head against the pillow and finally asked, "Did you and your wife ever go through something like what Daniel and I are going through?" He closed the book and leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Of course. Many times. The secret isn't never drifting apart. It's choosing to come back. Over and over again." I nodded. My chest felt tight. "I don't know if Daniel and I can come back this time." Robert didn't offer false hope. He just said, "Then you have to decide if you're willing to fight for it, or find who you really are without it." That night, I dreamed of being seen, held, and heard, not by a lover, but by someone who made me feel grounded again. Someone who reminded me I was still worth something, even when the world felt chaotic. When I woke the next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and Daniel's car was in the driveway. He rushed inside, apologizing over and over, hugging me tightly. He hadn't been able to call because of the storm, and he drove through the night to get there as soon as he could. Robert gave me a look before he left the room. Not a secretive look. A respectful one. One that said, "This moment is yours, and it's time." That afternoon, as Daniel and I walked the lake trail together, I told him everything. Not about some fictional tension or forbidden feelings, but about how I'd opened up, how his father listened, and how I'd realized how alone I'd felt for months. To my surprise, Daniel cried. He apologized for not being present, for losing sight of us. That weekend in that cabin, we started to rebuild, not because of passion or drama, but because something real had been uncovered. It's been months now. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's stronger. And every now and then, when Robert visits, we share quiet conversations over coffee. No words about that weekend. No need. Just mutual respect, understanding, and the unspoken truth that sometimes, being seen by someone, without expectation, without judgment, is enough to change everything.